Bob, are you there?
I'm here.
Bob,
Good evening,
it's
Bob.
it's much pleasure to have you on the show. We appreciate your cooperation and willingness to come on, and thanks for joining us. And hope
Much
everything is well
appreciated.
down in Texas this evening. Uh, First and foremost, a little background on Bob Bruce, Tony. Born in Detroit, signed by Detroit, went on to play 9 major league seasons with the Tigers, Astros, and Braves. Actually, we talked earlier, won 15 games back in 1964.
Great year that year.
And we'll get more to that because some of the stats were really incredible. But Bob, first of all, being born in Detroit and signed by the Tigers back in '53, staying at home, it must have, I'm assuming it was a dream come true for you at the time.
Well, at the time, it sure was. I never dreamed that I would ever get an opportunity to play for the Tigers because when I was a kid, I used to take the streetcar and go to Tiger Stadium. At that time, it was Briggs Stadium.
Yeah.
And watch them from the center field bleachers. And I used to save papers so that I could sell the used paper and get free tickets.
Boy, that was something. And, you know, I was looking through your career, your stats and everything, and what stood out to me, first of all, Bob, was that you actually played, over your 9 seasons, you played for 9 managers, some of them interim at the time.
It may be a record, Bob.
You know, it's something when you think about it. Was that something tough, or was it something you just had to deal with and get used to?
Well, that was a career where I helped get fired.
Oh, you think you had something to do?
As a matter of fact, I was part of that with Cleveland. Cleveland and Detroit, they traded managers when they traded Rocky Colavito for Harvey
That's
Keene.
right.
Wow.
They Joe Gordon for Jimmy Dykes.
That's right. Dykes was. I have the list of managers here somewhere. We'll get to that. Bill Norman, Jimmy Dykes, Billy Hitchcock, Bob Sheffing was that 61,
Yes,
a really good
yes.
year. But we'll get to that too, Tony. But you mentioned the old Briggs Tiger Stadium, and Tony and I talk about it a lot. One of my best friends growing up was a huge Tiger fan. Bob lived right next door. Loved Tiger Stadium, loved Briggs Stadium. Maybe you could tell our viewers what it was like being a member of that team and playing in that stadium.
Well, you know, it's really funny. We won in 1961. We won 100 and some games, and we ended up 8 games behind the Yankees.
That was 61.
But that Yankee team was by far the best team I have ever seen in my life. I mean, they had 3 great catchers, and Jimmy Blanchard was the 3rd string catcher, and I thought he could out-hit everybody.
Yeah, good player. All these guys were.
You know, the first team that when I was called up to the Detroit Tigers in 1960, at the end of the AAA baseball season, I was with Charleston, West Virginia. And back then, we flew a DC-3, and we were coming, I think, from Denver. And in those days, the DC-3 could only handle 25 people. And all the equipment that went with it, bats, balls, and everything else. And we could only stay in the air for about 2 hours.
Wow.
So when we had to fly from like Denver to Charleston, West Virginia, and land on that mountaintop, when I was called up, we got in about 5 o'clock in the morning into Charleston, and they had a ticket there for me to go to New York to join the team in New York.
Wow.
Well, back then we only had $5 a day meal money, and we could only take 1 suitcase, and we were coming off a 2-week road trip. And I mean, I hadn't changed underwear in 3 or 4 days, and I had to come out and join the team in New York. I didn't get into New York till that afternoon. I had to take a cab. I had absolutely no money. I was out of money. I hadn't eaten, and the cab took me to the Roosevelt Hotel, and I couldn't pay him. I said, hold on here, and I was praying that I could meet somebody in the lobby. And I ran up the stairs, and he's chasing me up the stairs, calling me every name in the book. And
Pay the bill.
yeah, but anyway, that was quite an indoctrination, and I did find the traveling secretary, and he paid the cab
Finally
driver.
worked out. Wow, what a story. What a way to get indoctrinated. And I'll remind our viewers, you're watching Monday Night Sports Talk. On the phone with us, former MLB pitcher Bob Bruce. We're talking about, first of all, his days in Detroit. And before I send you over to my co-host Tony, I was just looking at some of those early teammates in Detroit, Bob. Names like Kaline and Harvey Keene. And you were brought in with some good pitchers were already in place. You had guys like Jim Bunning, Tony. Frank Larry was the Yankee killer.
He was the Yankee killer, yeah.
Paul Foytak was, according my father used to tell me about Paul Foytak. A good staff, Bob. Was it a bunch of good guys to hang out with and learn from?
Oh yeah, and I eventually took Paul Foytak's spot in the rotation there, but they were great guys. And just one little story about Frank Larry, because he was the Yankee killer for sure. Mm-hmm. My rookie year down there in Lakeland, Florida, I was going to start against the Yankees, and Larry was my locker mate, and he said, Bob, he said, the one thing you got to do with Mickey Mantle is you got to go out there and take charge and let him know you're in charge, and the first time he's up, you got to brush him back. Mm-hmm. So I thought, wow, I'm a rookie, Mantle. What a team that they had out there. So Mantle comes up in the first inning, and I brush him back. But I didn't come that close. Mm. So I thought, well, I'll do it again. Brush him back, and Mantle is really mad. I mean, he's just gripping that bat, and I thought the sawdust was going to come out of it.
Look at this rookie.
Well, I walked him on 4 pitches, thank God. But unbeknownst to me, Larry went over to Mantle before the game and said, you got to watch out for Bruce. He's going to brush you back. He's going to knock you down. So Mantle was waiting for this, and anyway, I thought that's a pretty good story.
Well, Larry did something right, Tony. That's for
yes,
sure,
he did.
because he's legendary there. Tony, question for Bob.
And Bob, good evening. And somehow I feel terrible. We've got your awful introduction to Major League Baseball, and then in '62 you end up in Houston in Cole Stadium with the mosquitoes and the fleas, and Richie Ashburn says this is the only town where people wear insect repellent instead of perfume for the women. And I mean, how did you feel about that? Was this, hey, this is great, I'm going to the National League, or oh my God, I'm leaving Detroit?
Well, obviously, when I got traded over there, I was disappointed because I had always wanted to really get in. I had spotty starts with Detroit. I had injuries, and right during probably the highlight of my career, really, I had 52 scoreless innings in the minor leagues, and they were ready to call me up, and then I got drafted in the Army. Mm-hmm. And I was in the Army for 2 years. I lost 2 good years of there.
Yeah.
And I was really disappointed, but it was a blessing. I loved Houston. I loved everything about it. We didn't score many runs, but I really, really enjoyed that. And it's true. the heat was almost unbearable.
I could imagine. Yeah. No dome. At first, this was before the Astrodome.
That park was in a gully, wasn't it, Bob? It was like almost like below ground level.
Well, the Astrodome was, and we watched it. We watched it go up, and I pitched the opening day game in there, in the Astrodome, and it was really something. Here we were, an 8th place club for 2 or 3 years, and we only had 1 or 2 writers following us. And then when we opened up the Astrodome, we had thousands of sports writers and announcers and everything, and it was quite a change. But
I was just going to say, that's for the first year, 62, when you were with the Colt 45s, about 10 wins, ERA of about 4. I mean, for an expansion new team, Tony, that's pretty impressive for a scratch. And then, of course, in 64, now this is mind-boggling. Bob wins 15 games. First of all, Bob played for those 9 seasons, Tony. He only played for one team that finished above 500. That, of course, was those 61 Tigers,
right,
which won 101. The rest of them were consistently 64, 96, 66, 96. Now, this 64 team, I'm looking at it, 66 and 96. Bob goes 15 and 9, 29 starts, ERA. Now, this is going to blow your mind. 2.76 ERA, which was 10th in the league. That was the decade of the pitchers,
type of game
right?
It was.
But that was a magical year for you, Bob. And I also did a little more research. You averaged about 1.46 walks per 9 innings, which was second in the National League. Impressive. What do you remember from that 64? It must have been a pretty special year for you, stat-wise.
Well, it was, and I had a few strikeouts that year. I mean, a few shutouts that year, and that was also the year that I struck out the side on 9 pitches against St. Louis, and I lost a no-hitter against Cincinnati. Nellie Fox was playing second base, and Pete Reynolds was playing first, and they had a ground ball that either one could have fielded, and I was covering first. And they both stopped and thought the other one was going to get it, and the ball rolled through for a base hit. But that was quite a year.
It sure was.
And, when you pitch the openers, you always get the other team's ace all year long. So it was a great year.
It sure was, and such impressive stats. And even the next year, Tony, on paper, you say Bob goes 9 and 18 in 34 starts, but the ERA 3.7, pitched 229 innings.
Yes.
But for a team that lost 97 games under Luman Harris, I guess was the manager at the time, that's still a good year. But it's just the way it was back then, and of course. And I'll ask you one more question about the Astrodome. Tony and I have talked about it before. It always seemed, watching Met telecasts, which we would get up here, very dark, what kind of, was it a pitcher's ballpark, Bob? Tough to pitch in, tough to see in?
Well, it was a real tough park for me to pitch in because the AstroTurf was new. And the ball would just fly through that infield. It would just skip through that infield, and I was kind of used to Colt 45 Stadium where there was grass.
Yeah,
and you really had to change the way you're pitching. But that was the year. I think all year, I don't think I had over 10 or 15 runs all year. It was every game was a battle.
Wow. That's tough. Yeah, and Colt Stadium, Tony, looking at the dimensions of that place was pretty pitcher friendly. 360 down the lines, 395, and 420 straight. Astrodome, but of course, he said, it makes a lot of sense. The turf, everything was quicker.
Yes.
Boom, ground balls that would be outs there were obviously hits.
Now, Bob, was it intended at first for there to be AstroTurf, or did they try to grow natural grass at first?
Well, they tried to grow the grass in the outfield, And when I pitched that first game, the first base hit that they got went out to right field, and I can remember them throwing the ball into me, and it was green. They had it. They couldn't grow grass, and so they had to paint it a lot out there. And so the next year they had AstroTurf all over. But that old AstroTurf was really tough stuff because if they bunted the ball down the third baseline, the ball would curve, kind of like a golf ball. It would curve towards the pitcher. If they bunted it down first base, it curved foul. So it took a lot of getting used to. The first day we went out there to practice, Nellie Fox was hitting fungos back to the pitchers because we had to get used to how fast that ball came off the AstroTurf. It just and he wasn't even trying to fungo it hard, and he was just getting. If you knew Nellie Fox, he was really getting a kick out of it because it was bouncing off everybody's shins there for a while.
I just remember Nellie and the Cards with that big chaw of tobacco.
Yeah. And he died young.
Yes,
That's
he
too
did.
bad. As we talk to Bob Bruce, we're going to be showing some. I think we have a collage of some of his
Yes, we
old
do.
baseball cards. We'll have that on the screen while we talk. I'll remind our viewers at home on the phone with us, former Major League pitcher Bob Bruce. Bob, you ended your career 67 in Atlanta. I guess that was the old Fulton County Stadium, Tony.
I believe so.
And that was
Bob
that
first
was
with them.
nicknamed what? The launching pad.
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us how it was pitching there versus the Astrodome, Bob. But I know that was definitely a hitter's ballpark down in Atlanta.
Well, that was quite an experience there. I got off to a real good start. I was 3-1, and I was that's where I ended my career really because I was pitching against Tom Seaver and I was winning 3-1 in the seventh inning, 1 out, man on first, and Tom Seaver, when he pitched out there, it was like he took a post hole digger and dug a hole, and then I'd go out there and pat it in. Well, I tried to reach back and really let one go, and my foot got caught under the lip rubber, and I come flying out of there, and I end up cracking my rib and pulling all the ligaments in, and that was the most painful injury I think I ever had.
Wow.
And I never came back off of that.
That was for a
awful.
pitcher. I would imagine that would be impossible. But that's too bad. In Atlanta, and looking at that team, Tony, with some of the great teammates on that team.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
I'm looking at Hank Aaron. I'm Joe
Yeah.
Torre. I mean, we could talk all day with Bob about
For
just
sure.
as Felipe Alou, Rico Cardi, who we've talked about, and Phil Negro, who I was just looking at that staff that year. Phil Negro, Tony, was quote-unquote the closer, but also had 10 complete games.
Yes.
But this is just the way things happen. And Pat Jarvis was on that staff and everything else. But
And Chief Nakahoma.
well,
He wasn't on the staff.
Atlanta.
Tony
was
Cloninger too.
Tony
Yeah.
Cloninger, it was something. We remember the old baseball cards. That's when I first got into collecting baseball cards, mid '60s, and these were the first guys that came up. And but that was some great stuff. But I was going to ask you, Bob. I had mentioned it already. Only one season during your 9 that you played on an over 500 team. Did the losing get to you, or was it something you just had to go out there every 4 days and just try your best?
Well, you really, I think I don't care if you're winning or losing, you have pride in what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to do my best whether I won or lost. And, I might have had a pretty good career if I didn't have to pitch against Sandy Koufax so often.
That's like Seaver and Koufax.
I was 0-11 111 for a career in.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, the guy was so great.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care. We battled many games going into the, 8th, 9th, 11th, 12th inning. And I'd always think, one of these days we're going to do it. One of these days we're going to do it. And he would just take his time. If you remember Koufax, take off that cap, take a deep breath, and come back, and you'd strike everybody out. He was so fabulous.
Boy,
Yeah,
amazing.
Tony got to see him a little more than I did. It was just before my time. I
Yeah.
know Tony got to see him a little bit, and the stories we've heard are just amazing. And hearing it from yourself, a guy that was right in the battle lines with him, that's just a tremendous honor to do that. But we're on the phone, folks, with Bob Roos. We have a couple more minutes with Bob. There's so many other things we could talk about, Tony. I mean, Bob, first of all, he did celebrate a birthday last week. So
Happy birthday,
happy
Bob.
belated birthday, Bob, there. And
Thank you
many
very
more.
much.
many more to come. I was looking
I hope so.
looking some of the older teams again, and what stands out, having grown up here in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, that 63 team in Houston, you had played with Rusty Staub, Tony, and Jerry Grody, who
Yeah.
became pretty famous Mets. And I know you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I
him
wanted to
something about-
ask. You had two members of the Dalton gang over there, Bob Farrell and Jim Owens. I mean, did these guys kind of maybe lead you astray every once in a while?
Well, they made it fun, really. Yeah, they were really characters, and they were great talents too.
Yeah,
And
the record
yeah,
shows that.
I tell you, Turk Farrell lost 20 games, Tony, in '62, and his
Yes.
ERA was 3.
Now, Bob, is that true? The story where he stayed after midnight to complete a game because he said nobody beats Farrell after midnight?
Well, the one thing, though, I do really remember about Dick Farrell, he was pitching in Milwaukee. Now, this is an incredible story.
Mm-hmm.
He was pitching, and Hank Aaron hit him with a line drive in the ninth inning. Hit him square in the, almost square in the head. And the ball went up in the air, 100 feet up in the air, and Joe Morgan caught it for an out. Eddie Matthews is the next hitter, but now he's hurt. Everybody's around out there, and they hold the game up for about 15 minutes. They leave him in the game. He strikes out Matthews on 3 fastballs, blew him right by him. Then they took him to the hospital, and he was in the hospital a week.
Bob,
only
all I
Dick
could
Farrell
say,
could do that.
2 words I'll just say, different era.
Much different
Okay.
era. I'll add 3.
But
Yeah.
that is amazing. But and I'm just looking at a couple more guys, Tony. He played with Joe Morgan, he just mentioned, was
Yeah.
21 years old in '65. An 18-year-old pitcher named Larry Durker in
Yeah,
'65.
quite a player.
And then, of course, '66, you had very, very interesting that you 39-year-old Robin Roberts, who just passed
Was
away,
there,
was
yes.
on that staff.
What a gentleman.
Really,
What
I-
a gentleman.
I wanted to ask
What
you
a
about
great
him.
guy.
And Mike Cuellar, Tony, who just passed away, was also
Was
on that
also
staff.
over there, yes.
12 and 10 that year, 2.2 ERA. Cuellar, another guy that just recently passed away.
Mm-hmm.
But they got about a minute left, Tony. One last question.
And I'll tell you, Bob, a story that always kind of gripped me when I was very young about the Houston Colts was the sad story of Jim Umbright, and how did that sort of affect you guys at that time?
Well, I was in Mesa. We were in Mesa, Arizona, and I lockered right next to him.
Oh,
And we came in off the field. It was before a game, Cactus League game, and came off the field. And he said, "Bob, look at this." And he had this black kind of a mole on his leg. And I said, "Geez, Jim, that doesn't look too good." And I said, "You better go see the doctor." and he did. And that afternoon, they had him on a plane back to Houston, and there was a horrible melanoma cancer. But that guy, what a guy! And he came back and he pitched that
That's what I
later
remember.
on that year, and he was effective. He did a good job.
Well, it's a sad story, but Tony,
Yeah.
we've learned a lot tonight about how the different eras handled different adversities.
Yeah, and Bob's really been a lost treasure and has really filled us in on a
Well,
lot
Bob,
of things.
I'm sorry our time is up. It's been a joy having you on
Really
the
has
show. Maybe we could do it again sometime. There's so many other questions we had, but I want to thank you for your kindness in calling in, and we'll stay in touch. And many more birthdays ahead for you. And thanks for everything. And we'll talk soon, Bob.
We're appreciative, sir.
Well, you bet. Thank you so much, guys.
Our pleasure. Take
Good night.
care.